Hello everybody, welcome back to another comparison video. This time around I'm looking at The Phantom of Venice. And as usual, I'm going to start by looking at a novel, and then I'll be looking at a game. In this case, the novel is The Phantom of Venice. It was published in 1985, and the game is also The Phantom of Venice, and was released in 2008. And of course, a spoiler alert is in effect because I'm going to be giving away a whole lot of details. So let's look at the book. So as previously noted, it is titled The Phantom of Venice. It's book number 78 of the Nancy Drew Mystery Stories series, or the Digest paperbacks. And in this adventure, we have Nancy, who has been asked by her dad to come to Venice to help with a case he's working on, which involves the kidnapping of an employee from a glassworks factory. And as Nancy's flying over to Italy, she meets a girl on the plane named Tara Egan and learns that her father, Rolf, had recently drowned in a canal in Venice, and she's gone to Venice to collect his personal belongings. So there's a bit of a sad undercurrent to this whole novel about what's happened with Tara's dad. And Tara's initially staying at a pension or pension, and Nancy is sort of been asked to invite her by her host to come stay at the Palazzo with Nancy. Her host is a really generous man, so they wind up staying together in the same place, which is really nice and gives Tara some additional support. Although I say that, and there are some bumps along the way. There's some animosity for a little bit in the book between the two girls. I'll leave those details for you to read. But as Nancy's investigating this kidnapping for her dad, she discovers that there is a link between Tara's father and the kidnapping victim. So probably not a big surprise to us as the readers, but that is a big part of this story. And one other thing that happens is a phantom appears twice in the room that Nancy and Tara share, and he's wearing a skull mask and terrifies the girls. So the characters we have are, of course, Tara Egan, this young woman who Nancy meets on the plane, whose father has recently died. Giovanni, or Zani, Spinelli. He is the younger brother to the woman who was dating Tara's dad, and he's quite a flirt, and they run into him a whole bunch in Venice. Then we have the Marchese Francesco del Falcone, who is the host to Carson and Nancy, eventually Tara, and a whole bunch of other people. We have Katrina Van Holst, who is another guest at the Palazzo, and she's a photojournalist. Don Madison, who also stays at the Palazzo and works at the glassworks factory. And then Pietro Rinaldi, and this is the individual who was kidnapped from the glassworks. And what we learn in the story is, or rather what Nancy learns, is she uncovers that Pietro and Rolf were in possession of a diamond from Africa. So the two knew each other quite some time ago, and they wind up getting this diamond in their possession. And a diamond cartel is not happy about it. They kind of want to be the only ones smuggling diamonds, and so they are after Rolf and Pietro and try to steal the diamond back. And included in the gang are Katrina and Zani. So two of the guests who are staying at the Palazzo, or rather one of the guests staying at the Palazzo and the other who was really close with Tara's dad, are some of the bad guys in this book. So now we're going to look at the game. This is game number 18, and it's called The Phantom of Venice. So in this story, Nancy's been invited to Italy by Prudence Rutherford, and through Prudence, by the GDIF to help uncover a theft ring. So there's a gang out and about stealing various works of art, such as statues, and like a goblet, lots of different things, so not necessarily glass. And Nancy learns that the gang is using the character names from the Carnevale as their code names. They also use playing cards, chocolates, and carrier pigeons to communicate their messages. So they've got this system that's rather intricate. And during the game, Nancy becomes the victim of the Phantom herself. She wakes up at night and there's the Phantom in her room, and he snatches her locket and then flees the scene. And one other really neat part that comes up in the game is Nancy gets to participate in a stakeout, which leads to the capture of the Phantom, though not to its leader. So the characters in the game include Margarita Faubourg. She is the host for Nancy. Helena Berg, who is a journalist who's also staying at the Palazzo. Colin Baxter, who is helping to fix up the Palazzo. He's quite artistic and creative. Enrico Tazza, who Nancy meets sort of in the course of her investigation, who is who has a bit of a sketchy character. Antonio Fongo, this is the first person who Nancy is sort of assigned to watch. He's on the group's radar. And then eventually Nico Petit, who is the Phantom who gets captured after the stakeout. And as the game progresses, Nancy learns that the leader of the theft ring is Helena. And we also have Fongo and Tatza, among others, who are working for her. So now let's compare the two stories. It's been a while, but I don't actually have to look at the title. The two share the same title. Amazing. So looking at the storyline, they do differ. In the book, Nancy's been invited by her dad to help solve a case of kidnapping, whereas in the game, she's been asked to help investigate a theft ring by the GDIF and someone she met on a previous case. The location for both is Venice, Italy, so there's something else that's actually the same. Again, it's been a while since we've seen that. And now we can look at the characters, and there are some similarities in the characters. It wasn't really the case in the last story, and it's a bit of a stretch for some of them, but that's okay. I'll dive into those. We'll start with book-only characters. So Tara, who is a young girl who's come to Venice to collect her father's belongings after his passing. We have Zani, who's a flirtatious young man who is involved in Katrina's gang. So we don't have quite the same characters. I mean, in the game, we do have other people who are involved in Helena's gang, but none who quite fit the characteristics of Zani. So I've chosen not to include them here. So when we do start seeing some overlap, this is with Dawn and Colin. So they're both a visitor to Italy who is attracted to Nancy, and they both have secrets. So in the book, Dawn, he works at the glassworks company, and initially he's quite distant from Nancy, and I'm not going to spoil what his secret is. In the game, Colin shows his interest for Nancy fairly quickly, quite immediately, and his secret has to do with him using a fake name and the history and reason for that. The next pair of characters we'll look at are Francesco and Margarita. So they are seemingly well-off Italians who play host for Nancy. So in the book, the host is male, it's Francesco, and he's really well known in Venice, and he is wealthy and he hosts parties. He's a really kind man. Whereas in the game, Margarita, female character, is quite stingy with her money, and she wants to be a part of high society but isn't actually there. And she's not exactly a friendly host to Nancy. The next pair, quite an obvious copy of characters, is Katrina and Helena. So a journalist visiting Venice who is part of a criminal organization and is staying at the same palazzo as Nancy. So in the book, this is Katrina. She's a Dutch photojournalist. In the game, it's Helena, who's an Austrian journalist, and she forms her own gang by way of the ties she's made while doing research on criminals. So quite a bit of similarity. They're both in the field of journalism, different backgrounds. One's Dutch, the other's Austrian, but both part of, a criminal group. So then the last few characters here, we have Antonio, who's only in the game. So Antonio Fongo is observed by Nancy from the palazzo, and as noted earlier, he's the first person who Nancy knows she has to keep an eye on, and he sends messages via carrier pigeon. Next we have Enrico, also only in the game, and he's the one who hides the stolen goods until they can be sent abroad. So those are the other people in the gang for the game. And then of course we have one last person who, there's the crossover between both stories. This is the Phantom, but I thought he was good to put at the end of the list of characters. So the Phantom is a figure who's wearing a frightening mask who scares Nancy at night, just to put it broadly. In the book, more specifically, the Phantom turns out to be Tara's father, and he means her no harm. Should probably make that clear. Whereas in the game, the Phantom is Nico Petit, who isn't a great person. He's the one perpetrating all the thefts on behalf of the ring. And then just a couple of things that do overlap that are not characters. So playing cards. In the book, there is a card found in Pietro's home. Again, Pietro is the kidnapping victim. And then in the game, playing cards are used to communicate the targets of theft. So I really appreciate her director took this really, really tiny detail and managed to turn it into a big part of the plot of the game. It was really brilliant. And then the next thing to look at is the idea of art. So it's sort of being the center for all the thefts. So in the book, it's more specific to glassworks. And in the game, it's various pieces of expensive art. So not necessarily glass. And I decided I would talk about the ending because it's not too complicated for the two stories, although I haven't been doing that much lately. So for the book, Nancy reasons that the thieves are after a diamond. And I'm not going to get into how she figures that out. You can read the book to find out. And she has actually purchased the diamond. Not that she knew it was a diamond at the time. And she and Dawn decide to go to the glassworks and basically stake it out. We could say that's another stakeout. And they do this because she figures that Pietro is going to be released by the kidnappers, and he's going to go and try and find this diamond, and the cartel are going to follow him, which sure enough is what happens. And then Nancy and Dawn successfully subdue the criminals. In the game, a little bit different. Nancy and the GDIF have their own stakeout, and they capture Nico as the Phantom. But this happens before she's able to establish the gang's leader. So Nancy continues to investigate, and she locates where the stolen goods are. And through that, she finds this letter which leads her to identifying Helena as basically the head culprit. Nancy tracks her down, and then the police capture her. So fairly different endings, but yes, there is a little carryover of a stakeout. So in conclusion, the 1985 novel and the 2008 game may share a title and location, but the stories are fairly different. The novel focuses on a kidnapping and is centered around a glassworks facility, whereas the game revolves around a theft ring which steals artwork of a variety of mediums. There are some similarities between characters, so primarily with Katrina and Helena both being journalists and being part of this gang, and a little bit of overlap with Dawn and Colin and then the hosts. But overall, the cast play different roles between the two versions of the story. And both of the stories are quite interesting in their own right. And a thing that I think is interesting is that her interpretive could have followed the source material more closely, and they chose not to. Had they followed the book, I think it still would have made for an interesting game. But I think the choices they made to change it, the changes they made for a far more enjoyable game than it would have been if they'd actually stuck fully to the story from the book. So there we go. That is my comparison for The Phantom of Venice. So very interesting stories. I liked both of them. It's a little complicated in the way Nancy reasons out the diamond. That's where I think it wouldn't have maybe made for the best game, or they really would have, I don't know, they would have had their work cut out for them, I think, to make it work for fans, for people to follow along. I mean, maybe they could have come up with something, but it's just, in the book, it's something that Nancy just kind of figures out. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And I think the game is fantastic. It's one of my favorite games. I love that Nancy gets to basically go undercover and is asked by police to help with a case. I think that's just so much fun. So I really like both of these, both versions of the story. I do recommend that people read the book if they have access to it, and to definitely play the game because it's a fantastic game. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I do actually should mention that I appreciate the focus on artwork. So we're not looking at money or gold. I mean, these are things of expense, but the focus is on the value of art as well. So I do think that also makes for a more interesting story. I really quite like that. So thank you everyone for taking the time to watch or just listen to the video for this comparison. I hope you found it interesting. I know I say that all the time, and I've probably said that a lot too. But thank you, regardless of whether or not you enjoyed it. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.